Welcome back to our fourth deep dive, in our series
Mhm.
Discussing Singlehood.
Yeah,
It's been amazing so far, like exploring all these different, sides of being single these days.
it has been really fascinating.
Um, and over these past few deep dives, we've talked about so many things like, why people choose to be single,
Right.
the pressures they face from society,
Mm-hmm.
and all those unexpected benefits that sometimes come along with being single.
Absolutely.
But today we're gonna kind of shift gears a little bit,
Okay.
and we're gonna look at how being single can be different for men and women.
It's an important distinction.
Yeah, and to help us kind of break this down, we're looking at this academic article called "Sisters Are Doing It for Themselves: Gender Differences in Singles Well-Being."
I love that title.
I know, me too.
It's so catchy.
And it's so appropriate, right?
Yes.
And this study is really cool because it pulls data from like 10 different research projects.
I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, we're talking thousands of participants.
Thousands.
So we know that these findings are pretty solid.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what's really interesting is that the researchers weren't even looking for gender differences.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were studying well-being and singlehood
Okay.
more broadly, but these differences just kept popping up.
Well, they must have been pretty significant then if they weren't even looking for them.
They were significant enough to warrant a deeper look, for sure.
So what did they find?
Well, the big takeaway is that single women, they report higher levels of well-being
Really?
compared to single men, and this was across a range of different indicators.
Hold on. So you're saying single women are reporting higher well-being?
That's exactly what we're saying.
I mean, that kind of flies in the face of everything we've been taught to believe, doesn't it?
It really challenges those stereotypes we've all seen in movies and TV shows.
Yeah, totally. Like you always see the single woman as like this, lonely and desperate creature, while the single guy is like, footloose and fancy-free, living his best life.
Exactly. And this research suggests that might not be the whole picture.
Okay, so how do they even measure well-being in this study?
Yeah, it's a big concept, right?
Yeah.
Well, they looked at it from different angles. They used 4 key indicators.
Hmm.
First, their satisfaction with relationship status.
Okay, so how happy people are with being single.
Exactly. It's not just general happiness, but specifically how they feel about being single.
Gotcha.
Then there's life satisfaction, which is broader.
Right? Like overall quality of life.
Yeah, career, health, social connections, all of that.
So it's kind of like how satisfied are you with your life in general?
Exactly. And then we have sexual satisfaction.
Which I'm assuming is all about feeling fulfilled in terms of, sexual needs and desires.
Precisely, whether they're sexually active or not.
Okay, and finally, they looked at the desire for a partner.
Yes, which basically measures how much someone wants to be in a romantic relationship.
So it's like a spectrum. Some people are actively looking for a partner,
Mm-hmm.
while others are perfectly content being on their own.
Exactly. And the really interesting thing is that single women, they scored higher on all 4 of these indicators.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just like a small difference, is it?
No, the differences were statistically significant.
Okay, so we're not talking about random fluctuations here.
These were consistent and robust differences.
So this is definitely something worth looking into.
For sure.
All right, so we've established that single women seem to be doing pretty well.
At least according to this research, yeah.
But the big question is, why? Why are we seeing these differences?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, what's going on here?
Well, the study suggests there are a few potential explanations, and one of the most compelling is social support.
Which makes sense. I mean, we've talked about in previous deep dives how important those connections are for well-being.
Right. It's not just about having a romantic partner. It's about that broader support network.
Exactly. And this study found that single women were more likely to say they were happy with their social support.
Compared to single men.
So even though they're not in romantic relationships, they're still finding that connection and sense of belonging from other sources.
It seems so.
It makes me wonder if this ties back to traditional gender roles.
Possibly.
Like if women are often raised to be more nurturing and caregiving,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're just better at building and maintaining those kinds of relationships.
It's an interesting thought.
I mean, it's not that men aren't capable of having close friendships,
Right.
but maybe there's something about the way we socialize them that makes it harder.
Yeah, and oftentimes men, they rely on their romantic partners as their primary source of emotional support.
So when they're single, that support system kind of disappears.
It can feel that way.
It's like they're putting all their eggs in one basket.
That's a great analogy.
So this is a good reminder for everyone listening, men especially.
Hmm.
You know, invest in building a diverse and supportive network.
Throughout your life.
Yeah, one that goes beyond romantic relationships.
Absolutely.
So if you're single and listening to this right now,
Yeah.
think about your connections. Are you surrounding yourself with people who uplift and empower you?
That's the key.
Are you putting in the effort to nurture those relationships?
Because as this research suggests, it makes a huge difference for your well-being.
Huge. And it's not even just about quantity, it's about quality, right?
Exactly. Having a few close friends that you can really count on
Right.
can be much more beneficial than having a large but superficial social circle.
I totally agree. All right, let's move on to another interesting point from this study, heteronormativity.
Ah, yes. This is a concept that can be a little bit tricky to grasp sometimes.
Yeah, it is kind of a heady term,
It is.
but I think it helps to break it down a little bit.
Yeah.
Essentially, heteronormativity is this idea that being straight is like the normal or default sexual orientation,
Right. Right.
and that all romantic relationships should follow this traditional, like male-female model.
And that assumption can have real consequences.
Yeah, how so?
Well, for single women, the pressure to conform to these expectations can be immense.
Right, they're constantly bombarded with messages that their worth is tied to their ability to snag a husband.
Exactly. And if they choose to stay single,
They might face judgment or stigma,
they might be seen as incomplete somehow.
and that can lead to feelings of shame or inadequacy.
Absolutely. Or pressure to settle for a relationship just to fit in.
Right, so it's almost like their value is being judged based on their relationship status.
Exactly. And for single men, heteronormativity plays out a little differently.
Okay, I'm curious how.
Well, while men might not face the same pressure to get married,
Right,
they're still expected to embody these masculine ideals.
like being strong, independent,
Use
successful.
those kinds of things. And if they're not in a relationship, especially as they get older, they might worry they're not living up to those expectations.
It's like there's this invisible script that dictates how men should be.
And if they deviate from that script, they're seen as failing somehow.
Right, and this is where the study's findings about single men's lower well-being becomes really intriguing.
You think so?
Yeah. I mean, could it be that these feelings of inadequacy and insecurity
Mm-hmm.
are contributing to their unhappiness?
It's certainly a possibility.
It makes you wonder if we're doing enough to challenge those harmful gender stereotypes.
And create a more inclusive and accepting society.
Yeah, where everyone feels valued no matter what their relationship status is.
Absolutely. And this research really highlights the fact that singlehood is so much more than just being alone.
Right.
It's about navigating all these complex social expectations and cultural norms.
It's about recognizing that there's no one right way to be single.
Exactly. The beauty of singlehood is that it lets people define their own path and find happiness on their own terms.
You know, that's a really powerful message, I think. But before we go any further, I do want to mention that this research mainly focused on heterosexual individuals.
That's an important point.
So we're missing a huge part of the puzzle here.
The experiences of LGBTQ plus singles.
Right, and their stories are just as important for understanding the full spectrum of singlehood.
Absolutely. We need more research that focuses specifically on their unique challenges and joys.
Couldn't agree more so far. What would you say are some of the key takeaways from this study? What do we want our listeners to really walk away with?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that singlehood is not a monolithic experience.
Okay.
There are these really significant gender differences in well-being, and those differences likely intersect with age,
Authenticity.
sexual orientation, all sorts of other factors.
So it's like we're looking at a kaleidoscope.
Exactly, not a single flat image.
And this study really challenges us to think beyond those stereotypes. You know, the idea of the miserable spinster.
It's simply not supported by the research.
In fact, the research shows that single women are reporting higher levels of well-being than single men.
Across those 4 key indicators.
Which brings up a really fascinating question. If women are generally happier being single, what does that mean for our understanding of marriage and all those societal pressures to find a partner?
That's a big question.
Yeah, are we putting too much emphasis on finding the one?
When it seems like there's so much potential for happiness outside of those traditional relationships?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question we'll continue to grapple with throughout this series.
Sure.
But for now, I think it's important for our listeners to just sit with this information
Mm-hmm.
and really think about what it means for their own lives.
And for society as a whole.
Absolutely. And remember, this is just one study.
There's so much more to learn about singlehood.
But what we've discussed today opens up some really exciting avenues for further exploration.
It does. For example, the study didn't really dive into the reasons why single men might be reporting lower well-being.
Right. Is it all about social support,
Or are there other things going on?
like financial stress,
Societal expectations.
mental health?
All of those could be playing a role.
And those explanations might be different for different groups of single men. Older single men versus younger single men. Black single men versus white single men.
There's so much nuance here.
And exploring those nuances is key to really understanding the complexity of singlehood.
It's not enough to just point out the gender gap we need to figure out what's driving it.
So we can better support single men,
And create a more equitable society for everyone.
regardless of their relationship status.
Precisely.
And speaking of nuance, I think it's worth noting that this study, while it focused on those 4 key indicators of well-being,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't really delve into all the other factors that could contribute to those feelings of satisfaction or dissatisfaction.
That's true.
Like they didn't look at things like career satisfaction or financial stability or physical health.
All of which can have a huge impact on our overall well-being.
Yeah. And they also didn't really explore the role of personal values and beliefs.
Mm.
You know, for some people, singlehood might align perfectly with their sense of independence and autonomy,
Right.
while for others, it might create this longing for a partner.
And we can't forget about personality traits.
Right.
Some people are naturally more extroverted,
They thrive in social settings,
while others are more introverted and find energy from solitude.
and those differences could definitely play a role in how people experience singlehood.
For sure.
So it's like this multi-layered puzzle.
And this study is just giving us a glimpse into a few of those layers.
Exactly. And it's up to us to keep exploring those layers and piecing together a more complete picture.
Of what it means to be single in the 21st century.
And I have a feeling as we do that we're going to uncover even more surprises
I think so too.
and challenge even more assumptions.
I'm sure of it. As we kind of dig deeper into this study, it becomes really clear that we can't just talk about singlehood, you know?
Right.
Like it's one big universal experience.
Yeah, it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Not at all. And one thing this research really points out is the impact of age and ethnicity.
Okay, so how do those factors shape the experience of being single?
Well, one of the findings that really stood out was that older single men reported lower levels of life satisfaction
Hmm,
and sexual satisfaction compared to younger single men.
interesting. I wonder if that has to do with societal expectations, you know?
Yeah, I think those play a big role.
It's like there's this pressure on men to achieve certain things by a certain age.
Get married, have kids, climb the career ladder.
Exactly. And if they haven't hit those milestones, especially if they're still single,
They might feel like they're falling behind.
right, it's like society is telling them that their worth is tied to their relationship status and their achievements,
And those pressures can become even more intense as men get older.
especially in a culture that values youth so much.
Yeah, and we also have to consider the financial aspect.
Right, because financial security is a major concern for a lot of single people.
Absolutely. And for older men who might be facing retirement or health issues.
Those worries can be even bigger.
Exactly. So it's not just about feeling lonely or left out.
It's about those very real economic anxieties that can come with being single later in life.
And that's why it's so important to talk openly about the financial challenges of singlehood.
Right, and to advocate for policies that support single people of all ages.
Absolutely. All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the ethnicity findings.
Okay, what did the study reveal about how race intersects with singlehood?
Well, one interesting finding was that Black men reported higher levels of relationship satisfaction
Really?
compared to white men.
That's fascinating. Why do you think that is?
It's complex, but I think cultural factors are definitely at play.
In what way?
Well, in some Black communities, there might be less emphasis on traditional marriage as the ultimate goal
Okay.
and more acceptance of alternative relationship models.
So less stigma attached to being single,
Potentially. Yeah, and more flexibility in how people define family and partnership,
which could lead to a greater sense of contentment with being single.
even amidst societal pressures.
It makes me think about the importance of community support, too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we often hear about the strength and resilience of Black families and communities.
And how they can provide a safety net for people facing challenges.
Exactly. And that sense of community could be a powerful buffer against some of the negative experiences of singlehood.
Especially for single men.
It's like having this built-in support system.
To help navigate the ups and downs of life.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
it's not all sunshine and roses, right?
Unfortunately, no. The study also found that Black women reported a higher desire for a partner.
Compared to white women.
That's right.
which seems kind of contradictory given that Black men were more satisfied with being single.
It does seem that way, but I think it speaks to the unique challenges that Black women face in the dating world.
Like what kind of challenges?
Well, they might have more difficulty finding partners who share their values.
And understand their experiences,
Exactly. And they might also face more stereotypes and prejudices.
which can make it harder to form those meaningful connections.
Absolutely. And this could lead to a feeling of frustration.
And a desire for a partner who can provide that love and support.
Like they're caught in this double bind,
Facing pressure to find a partner.
but also facing barriers that make it harder
And this highlights the need to address those systemic barriers.
and create a more equitable dating landscape for Black women.
You know, this whole conversation about age and ethnicity really underscores the point that we need to move beyond those simple generalizations about singlehood.
Couldn't agree more. It's not just about single men versus single women.
Right, we have to consider all these intersecting factors.
Gender, age, race, sexual orientation.
And all the other things that make each person's experience unique.
Absolutely. And this research challenges us to be more curious and empathetic.
To recognize the diversity and complexity of human experiences.
Exactly. Speaking of challenging assumptions, this study also looked at the topic of sexual satisfaction.
Ooh, okay. Tell me more.
Well, the findings here were pretty interesting.
I'm all ears.
Single women reported higher levels of sexual satisfaction
Really?
compared to single men.
Wow. That is surprising considering all the stereotypes about men and sex.
I know, right? It really flips the script.
So what's the reason for this gender gap in sexual satisfaction?
Well, one possibility is that women are just more in tune with their own bodies and desires.
That makes sense. They're often encouraged to explore their sexuality and prioritize their own pleasure,
Exactly. And they might be more comfortable communicating their needs.
which can lead to more fulfilling experiences.
Exactly. On the other hand, men are often taught to focus on performance and achievement.
In the bedroom.
And that pressure can actually create anxiety.
And take away from the enjoyment.
It's like they're so focused on the destination that they miss the journey.
That's a great way to put it. And it shows how important it is to shift that focus from performance to pleasure.
Encourage men to explore their sexuality with more curiosity and openness.
And less pressure.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that for many women, sexual satisfaction is about more than just the physical.
Right. It's about feeling connected and respected and desired.
And that emotional connection can really enhance the physical experience.
And lead to a deeper sense of fulfillment.
It's about the whole package.
But we do need to remember that these findings are based on averages.
Of course, not every single woman is going to be more sexually satisfied than every single man.
There's always going to be variation.
And factors like relationship quality, communication skills, body image, mental health all play a role.
Absolutely. And this study wasn't designed to unpack all of those nuances.
But it does give us a starting point for understanding how gender might influence sexual experiences in singlehood.
And it challenges us to think beyond those stereotypes.
And recognize the diverse realities of sexual satisfaction.
So to recap, we've seen that single women are reporting higher levels of well-being.
Compared to single men.
And we've explored some possible explanations for this gender gap.
Social support.
Heteronormativity.
Sexual satisfaction.
And the influence of age and ethnicity.
But like any good deep dive.
This research leaves us with even more questions.
So let's talk about them. If women are reporting higher well-being as singles, what does that tell us about the bigger picture?
Yeah, are we putting too much emphasis on marriage as the ultimate goal?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And this research definitely makes us rethink those deeply ingrained societal messages.
About finding the one.
And happily ever after.
It's like we've been told that marriage is the key to happiness.
But maybe that's not always true.
At least not for everyone.
Especially for women, this research suggests a possible shift.
Maybe they're realizing that marriage, at least in its traditional form, doesn't always live up to the hype.
And maybe they're finding fulfillment in other ways.
That don't involve being someone's wife.
This isn't about saying marriage is bad or wrong.
Right.
It's about broadening our perspectives and recognizing that there are many paths to a fulfilling life.
And giving singlehood the respect it deserves.
Not treating it as some kind of waiting room for marriage.
Exactly what's so exciting is that this research opens up all these new avenues for exploration.
For example, we need more research on the experiences of LGBTQ+ singles.
Their stories are so important and often overlooked.
And their perspectives could offer even deeper insights into the relationship between singlehood and well-being.
And as we mentioned before, we need more research on why single men might be struggling.
It's not enough to just point out the gender gap. We need to understand the reasons behind it.
so we can provide better support.
So what can our listeners do to keep this conversation going and challenge those old-fashioned ideas about singlehood?
Well, first of all, be mindful of the language you use.
Avoid those outdated terms like spinster or bachelor.
And use respectful language that acknowledges the validity of singlehood.
And don't be afraid to push back against those societal pressures that push people towards marriage.
Encourage open and honest conversations about the different ways people find love and connection.
And most importantly, celebrate the single people in your life.
Support their choices. Listen to their stories.
And recognize the unique strengths they bring to the table.
This has been another really thought-provoking deep dive into the world of singlehood.
I enjoyed it.
We hope this episode has given you some new insights.
And sparked some interesting conversations.
And remember, whether you're single or partnered, the most important thing is to find what brings you joy and fulfillment.
There's no one right way to live your life.
Thanks for joining us on this journey of exploration.
Until next time, keep diving deep.
You know, as we wrap up this deep dive, I can't help but feel like we've just scratched the surface.
Yeah, there's always more to uncover, right?
Absolutely. But I think we've gained some really valuable insights today. This study about, gender differences and well-being really made me question some of my own assumptions about singlehood.
I can see that it's definitely eye-opening.
I mean, the idea that single women are actually reporting higher levels of well-being than single men,
Right.
that's a game changer.
It really challenges those old stereotypes about single women being unhappy or desperate to find a partner.
And it makes you wonder if those beliefs are more about societal expectations than reality.
Right. It's not necessarily reflecting the lived experiences of single women.
Exactly. And I think this research has implications not just for how we view singlehood.
But relationships in general.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
Well, if single women are finding fulfillment and happiness outside of those traditional romantic relationships,
It makes you question all those pressures we put on people to get married,
right? Are we so fixated on the happily ever after idea?
that we're missing out on other forms of happiness.
Maybe it's time to broaden our definition of what a successful and fulfilling life can look like.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message, especially for young people who are trying to figure out their own path.
Absolutely. We need to make space for all kinds of relationship models.
And celebrate the choices that individuals make, whether they choose to be single or partnered or something else entirely.
It's about honoring those individual choices.
And recognizing that singlehood is not just some temporary state.
Or a waiting room for marriage.
Right. It's a valid and valuable way of life.
Just as meaningful and fulfilling as any other.
Absolutely. But we can't forget about the other side of the coin here. This study also showed that single men are facing some challenges.
Especially when it comes to things like social support and emotional well-being.
So what can we do to support single men and help them navigate these difficulties?
Well, one important step is to create environments where men feel comfortable opening up about their feelings.
And seeking support.
Yes, we need to break down those masculine norms that tell men to bottle up their emotions and just tough it out.
We need to encourage them to be vulnerable
To express themselves.
and to ask for help when they need it.
And I think it's also important to challenge those expectations that link a man's worth to his relationship status or his career success.
Because those expectations can be so damaging.
They create so much pressure to conform to these narrow ideas of masculinity.
And this is where community becomes so vital.
It's essential for everyone.
But especially for single men who might be feeling isolated or lacking that emotional support.
Building those strong social connections is so important.
It's not just about having friends
It's about having people you can confide in,
who will listen without judgment.
who will offer encouragement and support.
And those connections can come from all sorts of places,
Family, friends, colleagues, community groups.
even online.
The key is to make the effort to reach out and build those relationships.
And to be open to receiving support.
Because it's a two-way street.
But beyond those individual efforts, we also need to consider systemic changes.
To create a more equitable and inclusive society for single people.
What kinds of changes are we talking about?
Well, addressing the financial disparities that often impact single individuals.
Especially single parents.
Things like affordable housing access to childcare fair wages.
These are all crucial for creating a more level playing field.
And we need to challenge discrimination against single people.
Whether it's in housing or employment or even in social settings.
It's like single people are often treated as second-class citizens.
And that has to change.
We need to cultivate a culture that values and respects people regardless of their relationship status.
So as we wrap up this episode, I'm feeling a sense of hope and possibility.
Me too. It's been encouraging.
This research has shown us that single women are thriving in many ways.
And it's given us valuable insights into the struggles that single men are facing.
And it's sparked a conversation about creating a more inclusive and supportive world for everyone.
Absolutely.
I think the most important takeaway here is that singlehood is not a problem to be solved.
It's an experience to be embraced.
It's a journey of self-discovery, growth, connection.
And it's a reminder that happiness and fulfillment can take many forms.
So whether you're single or partnered, the most important thing is to find what brings you joy and live authentically.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the world of singlehood.
It's been a pleasure being here.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep celebrating the diversity as human experiences.
And remember, you're not alone on this journey.